Welcome to Line Change, a podcast about hockey, social issues, and change makers in the game we love. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy. Welcome to Line Change. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy, and today I'm talking to professional hockey player Jacquie Pierri. But more than hockey, Jacquie is also a climate scientist. She works in engineering, specifically with a focus on refrigeration. If you've never wondered what goes into keeping arenas cool and the ice we skate on frozen, Jacquie's going to explain it to us because there are sustainable ways to do this, and there are ways that cause a great impact to our climate. Thanks for joining me for this Line Change. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy, and today our guest is Jacquie Pierri. Thanks, Jacquie, for joining me, and we are here to talk about the environment, and more specifically, the very exciting topic for me, and I think for other people once they hear you explain how important this is to the world of refrigeration, because I think we look at arenas, we think of the game we love, and when we look at the ice, we probably don't think anything about what it takes to get to that point, what it takes to keep that ice frozen the whole time, especially in those big NHL arenas where thousands of people are coming in. So we're going to get to that, but first of all, I want to talk to you about your own hockey career. Still playing the game. Maybe you can just tell us about where you're at right now. Obviously, you played some NCAA hockey and then moved on to the Canadian Women's Hockey League. But if you can just run us through that so people know your background if they're unfamiliar with Jacquie Pierri.
So I'm actually in northern Italy now. I'm playing in Bolzano in the European Women's Hockey League. I'm hoping to get my citizenship and to play for the national team here in Italy, but I'm still having fun just playing, even if that doesn't work out. I played at Brown University, and while I was there, I did an engineering degree, specifically in energy engineering. And then after I graduated, I followed one of my teammates from Brown up to Calgary, Erica Crom. She's coaching at Yale now. And I broke out the Inferno hoodie for this. So I played in the Canadian Women's Hockey League for 5 years. A year after I left, it was closed down and they started the PWHPA. But after I finished in Calgary, I moved over to Europe to study a master's degree, again in energy engineering, but more specifically in sustainability. And while I was doing that, I played 2 years in the Swedish Women's League, the SDHL. So I played in Stockholm. And yeah, like lots happened in that time. There was COVID. There's been a lot of movement in the women's hockey world, and there's been a lot of movement in the environment world. So while I was in Sweden, while I was finishing my studies, I ended up doing my thesis in refrigeration, specifically of ice rinks, which was just like the perfect mix of everything that I care about. So thank you for being interested to talk about the environment. I hope I can keep it interesting for people.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that, at the very least, when you listen to this conversation, I know that I've talked to you about this before. I learned something, and that was what made me want to talk about it some more, because it was a component of the sport that I'd never considered. And, on this podcast, this fits perfectly into what I think listeners here are wanting to hear about it, which is the other components, things that we don't necessarily think about, the issues that impact the game. And the environment, of course, is one of the, if not, of course, the greatest issue facing everyone worldwide right now. And it seems, I guess for me, who follows women's hockey so much, it is not abnormal to have someone talk about getting their engineering degree and then doing a master's thesis in refrigeration. It's women's hockey. We get these stories of people becoming doctors and scientists and lawyers and all of these wonderful things during your playing career. And that on the men's side is very abnormal, but on the women's side, it's still part of the game. And obviously that has to do a lot with the inequities of professional hockey for both sides, but um, it's still a fascinating thing to have so many talented athletes like yourself that have these uh, incredible academic careers as well. So we're going to talk about that refrigeration and the impact on the environment. So maybe you can just take us through your the topic of your thesis and some of the major things that you found out about keeping those ice rinks that we love cold so that we can play this game.
I guess first I'd like to start with when I was playing out in Calgary. Alberta is like the oil and gas capital of Canada, one of the oil and gas capitals of North America. Um, while I was there, I was working for a natural gas company, and ended up working on an innovation team where we were trying to find a sustainable route within the existing fossil fuel infrastructure. And I guess I just want to start by saying I don't think we need to be vilifying any of the people working in that industry, particularly if there are any hockey fans out in Alberta. There's very clear evidence that we've been sold an incorrect narrative about um, scientific disagreement about climate change. And um, my personal educational experience is also transformational in terms of being sold this idea that there's a middle path to getting towards a sustainable future and learning along the way the severity of the problem. So I think hockey is an important component. So there's a nonprofit project called Project Drawdown, and it talks about the top 100 solutions to climate change. Um, it's peer reviewed, very scientific. One of the top 5 solutions is refrigeration. And for me, when I read that when I was doing my master's, I was kind of like, what? Where is refrigeration in our everyday life? It's completely invisible. You know, I think of my refrigerator in my house, and that's kind of full stop what I'm thinking about. And then I came to realize that all of the computer servers around the world require massive refrigeration. All food storage, all supermarkets require a lot of refrigeration. And then, of course, our ice rinks. And so, my thesis, I looked at a novel refrigerant, the different energy efficiency aspects of it. But I think maybe before I can really explain that, I have to give a preview of kind of how ice rinks work. So I'll try not to be too nerdy about it. But basically, ice rinks are really energy intensive buildings. You have to cool this massive ice pad, but you also have to heat the stands. You have to heat the lobby. You have to heat hot water for the Zamboni and for your showers. So you have this really complex system. You also, with that heating and cooling, you have a lot of temperature exchange between the hot and the cold. You know, the thing when we were kids in physics, like hot air rises, it mixes with the hot and cold air mixes. You get a lot of moisture, you get a lot of condensation. I'm sure we've all been in rinks where the glass is completely fogged and it's super weird to play. That's caused by the hot and the cold mixing together. Under the rink, there are tubes that run a coolant basically. And the coolant that's running underneath the rink can be thousands of times more damaging than carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is the most common, most well-known greenhouse gas. We know that it traps heat in the atmosphere and is causing global warming. We also know that different substances, different gases have different rates of heating. So some gases trap more heat than others. For example, the most famous one is natural gas or methane, which traps about 30 times more heat than carbon dioxide. So it can be more damaging. And then you look at refrigerants, and those are thousands of times more damaging, some tens of thousands of times more damaging in terms of trapping heat in the atmosphere. Essentially, a lot of rinks in Canada are using ammonia, which has zero global warming potential. So it's the most sustainable in terms of when there are leaks at the end of life, when the fluid is changed out, it's often not disposed of properly. If ammonia is accidentally leaked, there's safety hazards and things that need to be protocols that need to be followed, but it's much less damaging than when traditional refrigerants, hydrofluorochlor, the HFCFs, when those are released into the atmosphere, they can be really, really damaging. So, okay, my research. With all that, I looked at it, diluted ammonia as the refrigerant to be underneath the ice pad. In Sweden, a lot of systems, also in North America, are indirect systems. So you have a fluid that's in the mechanical room that's undergoing phase changes and temperature changes to create that heating and cooling effect. So you compress it or you expand it, and that changes the properties of the gas. And then, so usually that's ammonia in Canada. In Sweden, they're using carbon dioxide, which again is less damaging than some of these other refrigerants. But a lot of rinks are using refrigerants in the mechanical room that are 4,000, 5,000 times more damaging. Then you exchange the heat of that fluid through a heat exchanger with another coolant that runs underneath the rink. And the rink has almost 20 kilometers of piping underneath it. It's quite large. It's to cool every corner of the rink. And we've all been to like old barns that like the piping clearly isn't running properly, and there's a corner that never freezes properly. um, so I looked at aqua ammonia for that fluid to be underneath the ice pad, and I looked at some, I don't know, very practical aspects of it in terms of how it can be used, what are the safety protocols. But then I also looked at the energy efficiency of that fluid. So there's the aspect of the rink in terms of refrigerants being released into the atmosphere. And there's also the energy consumption of running pumps, of running the actual devices in the mechanical room. And this fluid was found to reduce the pumping requirements quite significantly. So it was really optimistic, the findings, and it's starting to expand in Sweden. Um, but I'm not sure where it stands in North America. Obviously, it's a very niche topic, but I haven't seen anything in particular about it expanding into the North American market.
There's a variety of sides to this conversation where we all recognize that we need to do anything possible to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and reverse climate change that's ongoing. But the NHL, at the same time, created an NHL Green organization, first of all, which was supposed to look at the the lighting, the waste, the refrigeration, everything to do with their NHL buildings. Talking about travel, because I don't think everyone realizes how many tens of thousands of miles or kilometers the NHL teams spend on planes, which of course are a portion of it, but there's these invisible portions that, like you're talking about, like agriculture, that people don't understand the greenhouse gas emissions that come from what we do to soil or these refrigerants. And this kind of goes along with the hypocrisy a tiny bit of the hockey is for everyone debate right now, where we're saying one thing but we're doing something very different at times. And with the NHL, that's come through some partnerships with these, the hydrofluorocarbons that are far more damaging than ammonia, which was a traditional kind of coolant that people have been using, or refrigerant, I guess is the better term. But I don't know if you can explain what this deal is with the company is Chemours. I'm not even sure if that's the exact way you say it, but it's this kind of hidden conversation that went on with the National Hockey League a year or two ago. And it was talked about briefly in the newspaper, but not globally, not in terms of the conversations that we're having right now around LGBTQ plus people in sport and hockey, not the topics we're having around racism. And I know that they're different, but there's environmental oppression and environmental justice and environmental racism where people of color and minorities that are oppressed have sustain a larger portion of the damages of climate change without getting the benefits of the natural environment that many other people can enjoy on a daily basis. It's similar to, we all love hockey. It's a great game that we all want to play, but not everyone gets the exact same opportunities in the sport. And the NHL's agreement here to move away from ammonia to incentivize kind of this jumping to a refrigerant that's thousands of times more damaging is really confusing to me, especially when you see Climate Change or Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle, that's done everything they possibly can to go the other way and to make sure that all aspects of the building, from a living wall to how they manage their water, to this refrigerants, to the electricity that's there being completely sustainable and renewable energy. They've done everything that the average hockey fan, not just the scientist, could understand and see. But this agreement with the NHL, this partnership that's paying them, millions of dollars, uh, goes against it. And maybe you can just jump back into that idea of what's the difference? What is the real impact of saying, you know, embracing, no, we're not going to use ammonia anymore. We're going to shift back to this item.
First, I want to start with applauding the NHL for having an NHL green program at all. I think before we get into refrigeration, there is a ton of low hanging fruit of sustainability within the arenas in the NHL. When you look at waste diversion, single use plastic, offering transportation options for people to get to and from rinks. Climate Pledge Arena, I don't know if you're aware of this, but they're actually, the Climate Pledge is tied to a certification, a building certification that actually requires they perform within certain energy standards to maintain their rights to call themselves Climate Pledge Arena. So Seattle is doing really cool stuff. Okay, now on the refrigerant side and the deal with, I don't know how to pronounce it, but the chemical company that they partnered
Yeah.
with. Last time we talked, I didn't have any information about the global warming potential of some of the fluids that they were promoting. Since then, I've looked into it a little bit more and I found some data fact sheets about the chemicals, the refrigerants that are part of this green line. And I'm putting up air quotes for those that are just listening because um, while the green line, the green refrigerants that they're showing may be reduced from some of the fluids that they're replacing, um, it's probably because they've waited too long to replace refrigerants that we've known were damaging for a really long time. For example, some of the refrigerants that are up for replacement are looking at like 4,000 times what carbon is in terms of global warming potential. The highest global warming potential of the fluids in the Opteon grouping of sustainable refrigerants is at around 2,000 times. Okay, so the savings are significant. That's not nothing, but we have options available and proven in Sweden and in North America that have a zero global warming potential. And so I think that just points to the fact that the general public and also engineers who are doing the design of refrigeration systems for the NHL don't understand the urgency of the climate emergency, don't understand what exactly how big of a problem we're dealing with. And this is something we've talked about before, what a threat to the sport it is if we want to be really narrow focused. When we talk about accessibility to hockey with the Hockey is for Everyone campaign, costs are a big factor in that. And energy costs are a huge barrier to cheap ice time. And on top of that, global warming and shorter winter seasons are pushing more players inside. Pond hockey is becoming less and less available. This is something that we've talked about. There's an organization out of Finland called Save Pond Hockey. And a couple, I don't remember the name of the organization, but there's another organization that's actually studying and tracking the reduction in lake ice and how long people can skate during the season. So yeah, I'm disappointed in the refrigerant deal with the NHL. I think likely the company is selling it as a green line, and because this is such a complex topic, probably there aren't experts at the NHL who can really say or disagree with the company that's coming to them with a green line. It is more green than some of the most egregious refrigerants in use. Is it as green as we could be? Absolutely not.
That whole debate of what's green and what's clean, it reminds me of President Trump, who resist any other comment or conversation regarding that. But when the terms like clean coal come out,
Exactly.
it is not. There's no possible version of coal that is clean. So, is it potentially more clean than the systems they were using to burn coal originally? Probably. Is it completely damaging to our environment and our climate? Absolutely. I don't think any NHL team would be happy with improving just marginally like that over time in their own on ice performance. If you said, we have the option to go from 4,000 to zero, we're going to allow, 40 shots a game, or we're going to allow 0 shots a game. Every person on that team would be like, let's allow 0 shots per game. And, even if they said, okay, well, we have another system where we can allow 20 shots a game or 0 shots a game, it's pretty obvious what everyone would choose. And that's just the most basic analogy that there can be. But I think that when we talk about hockey, sometimes hockey people understand best in hockey terms, and so it makes sense to kind of throw that out there in that regard. Now, I want to go back to what you said about the outdoor game, because that's always a component of this, and there are so many organizations. You talked about Save Pond Hockey, and I'm going to have a few of the NHL ambassadors from that organization on at a later date to talk about that group and what they're doing. And I know for myself, I live uh, in the Great Lakes, and we've been having less and less ice, of course. This winter in particular, there's a local pond that I would usually go down to and skate with my family. And we didn't have a single day this winter that was frozen. There was no single opportunity to go skating. And that is something that's alarming. A lot of people that are climate deniers would say, it's cyclical, it's a trend. Um, Look at the snowstorm that we had, whatever. You get all those things that people want to point to ignore the truth, I guess, that's ongoing. The Rideau Canal in Ottawa didn't have skatable days this winter, and that was the first time in half a century that that's happened. So we see all this evidence, and we're willing to talk about it when it's really convenient and there's such a low cost. Me putting my recycling out, and we know that recycling is not even a incredibly effective path towards reducing our waste. We've talked about laws banning single-use plastics, and that's great. And I've stood in those NHL arenas as a media person and looked at the waste that's sitting on the ground after every single game under seats, and in it's immense. And there's 20,000 people dropping their popcorn bag and their 2 containers of plastic beer, and like whatever they're having. But this whole idea that the game of hockey was built outdoors on these frozen spaces, and when we're talking about that environmental justice, we're looking at free outdoor skating often, where all you need is an old used stick and a pair of skates, and you can play the game. And that is a really beautiful idea in my mind, where it's like soccer. You can play it anywhere as long as you have a ball. Or um, if there's a basketball net, it you can go to a parking lot or a gymnasium. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be indoors. And hockey, we don't have that equivalent if we don't have cold weather, consistently cold weather. And I think that is going to take away from a lot of those. I remember playing outside on rivers and backyard rinks, and I loved it. Um, what do you know about or what can you tell people, I guess, about the general climate emergency that they should know that's going to potentially impact that ability to get outside and play?
For me, the reason sustainability is such an important passion of mine is for the social justice reasons. Um, you're talking about all like the ice surfaces that weren't available this winter. This is likely going to be the coldest winter of our future. Um, there was a recent report came out, international panel on climate change from thousands of scientists around the world. We're at around 1.1 degrees warming from pre-industrial levels. And you have to think about these temperatures more like a body temperature than like the weather of the day, right? You're just a few degrees from a fever that can kill you, okay? We're not looking good for staying within 1.5 degrees, which is a temperature threshold that scientists think that we could still maintain food supply. These are like really critical pieces of nature that we are not able to remove ourselves from. I don't want to be alarmist, but I think there's reason for rational alarm given the data that's in front of us. Um, and on the social justice piece, we do know that communities in the global south are the most likely to be hit by this, the communities that have contributed the least, but also within our own countries. In America, because of redlining practices, historical practices that uh, confined Black and Brown people into, they were prohibited from desegregating, and their communities had different zoning laws. And we see the legacy of that now, that Brown and Black people are more likely to be next to high polluting power facilities, high polluting agricultural factory farms, um, high polluting highways. They have higher rates of asthma, and they're also much more likely to be victims to flooding, to forest fires. They have people with less spending power, have less ability to move out of communities that are at risk for floods. We saw with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans um, that there was a huge amount of refugees that left New Orleans and never returned to their homes. And we saw more recently, with Trump throwing paper towels at the victims of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. Those are American citizens. And I think we have a responsibility to do everything we can to slow this negative progress. I think we're driving towards a cliff right now, and in a lot of the political dialogue, we're talking about what's playing on the radio instead of uh, stopping. And while we can talk about what we can do as individuals, the bottom line is we need to stop burning fossil fuels. If we want to stay in a range that this planet remains livable, that we can grow our food, that we have water to drink, that we aren't dying from heat waves. I mean, I know these things sound very alarmist, but like I said, the data is very clear about these things. We need to stop burning fossil fuels.
It's such a simple idea, and yet the debate continues about renewable energy sources that are completely clean, and that the technology is increasing so rapidly that we have all the solutions that we need right now, and that ties back into exactly what you've been talking about. We have the knowledge, we have the science stating this is the best way to cool the ice surfaces that we have in these arenas, whether it's a brand new build or a retrofit of a 50-year-old facility. We know exactly what the best path is, and still we're choosing something else. And that's what we've been doing in all aspects of society. And I don't think that it's alarmist. I don't think that it's wrong to say, and that's why I was so excited to host the show to talk about these things that are blind spots, things that we just put our heads in the sand and ignore while we're watching hockey. I mean, I don't want to look at the game and think about how many global warming units are coming out of the ice surface while I'm watching Connor McDavid or Marie-Philippe Poulin, do their thing on the ice. But should I know about it? Absolutely. And that's why I'm so appreciative of you joining me today and having this conversation, because I do think it's a portion of hockey that we should talk about, and bringing together someone like yourself that's not just an expert in this climate conversation, but a professional hockey player that's gone through all of those ranks. It's such a unique thing to give voice to hockey players that want to do this change and want to be part of it too. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jacquie.
Thanks so much for having me and for being willing to talk about this. I think through sport, we understand how important leadership is. And I know it feels like we're just a small piece, but it adds up to a lot. Start to change the culture, start to change the conversation, and maybe things will actually change in time. I hope so.
Thanks for joining me. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy, and that was A Line Change. And our special guest today was Jacquie Pierri, talking about environmental impacts from the game of hockey, specifically refrigeration that is used to keep the arenas we love cool. Thanks again, and I look forward to you joining me again soon.